questions. Firstly, what does the future hold for young people, for those who are now disadvantaged in the labour market, and for the long-term unemployed? And of course, we know now that the COVID pandemic has seen and will continue to see many people losing jobs that were previously considered stable and secure. This only adds increased pressure to the jobs market during a time of economic shift and change with Brexit fast approaching. And secondly, the session asks, how do we avoid widening the inequalities that existed already prior to the pandemic? And we know that many people in local communities were already struggling before COVID, and we know that COVID has only added to this and worsened these disparities. So these are important and timely considerations to be having, and ones which are core to the day-to-day work and decisions of many of EDAS and SLAID's members, both now and in the months ahead. So today and the series of events that follow, we aim to stimulate thinking and discussion that will support all of you working in economic development and in the areas that relate to this, to develop, to plan, to deliver and to invest in the projects on the grounds in the months and the years ahead. Now, before we start, I just want to say a few housekeeping points. As is normal now, we're muting everybody except for the speakers, but can we ask that you use the chat box to raise any questions or any points that you want to let other people know about during the presentations and the discussion, and also to connect with other people that are in the room actually. And we will have time for questions at the end of the main presentations. We're going to hear from 4 speakers this afternoon, including Joanne Farrow from the Scottish Government, Pamela Smith from the Improvement Service, and Laura Neal from the Interior Council. And I'll introduce each of these in turn. But to begin setting the scene, I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Alan McGregor, Research Professor of Economic Development at the University of Glasgow Adam Smith Business School and former Director of the Training and Employment Research Unit between 1985 and 2017. He was also EDAS's first ever chair and is my old professor. So I'm really pleased to have you here today, Alan, and to be seeing you again. So over to you. And I think we maybe just need to get some slides organised just to get this started. Okay.
Well, that's it. Thanks very much, Liz. And obviously you were one of my best ever students.
Yeah, I have to say that.
As was Pamela, as was a number of other people that are on the list of people here today. I'm going to speak very quickly. I've got 3 slides and I've got 10 minutes. And we'll just go into the first extra slide. And what I'm going to cover is I'm going to look at some of the things that are the background to this, and what some of the things that brought on the agenda, if you like, the problem of people left behind, if you like. People have been left behind for hundreds of years, of course, it's not new, but in the current context, I'm going to look backwards 30, 40 years in a sense. And then secondly, I want to say a few things just about some of the challenges. There are actually many challenges, I think, but I've tried to restrict myself to a small number of challenges, which are not just for government in terms of responding effectively to this agenda. So the first thing we know is that major recessions leave a lot of people behind. Statistic, between 1979 and 1992, which encompassed the massive depression in Thatcher's years, the number of working age people on incapacity benefit went up from 800,000 to 2.2 million across the UK. And that's a good proxy for the people left behind. We don't have incapacity benefit as such anymore, but you guys are all pros, you know what I'm talking about here. 20 years or so ago, I recall a figure that if you were 5 years on incapacity benefit, working age, you're more likely to die to exit that benefit than to get a job to exit the benefit. Very scary and horrific statistic. This is in a context where many studies show that the longer you're unemployed, the harder it is to get back into work. And the thing that I think we may be forgetting in the current era is that can kick in very, very early. There's a lot of statistical evidence to suggest that can kick in at 13 weeks. And once it kicks in, it increasingly becomes harder to help that individual back into work. We know that long-term unemployment and being left behind, if you want to use those two, they're not quite the same thing, but if you want to use them interchangeably, has a lot of damage on people. It damages physical health, mental health, personal self-worth, motivation, etc. This was a massive problem in the 1930s for young people. And the cure, in inverted commas, was the Second World War. There were hundreds and hundreds of articles, books, commissions about what we're going to deal with, how we deal with the youth unemployment problem. The thing that dealt with it was war, was created full full-time work more or less overnight. We know that on the research front, that the number of issues an individual has to confront has a significant impact on their chances of getting a job. I know and understand that we want to go forward, we want to do the positives, we want to look at people's potential, all these things, but people have issues. A lot of working people have issues. And once you get 3 or more issues against statistically, homeless, addicted, prison background, whatever, your chances of finding a job again fall quite dramatically. Next slide, please, Alison. Although this was evident in the major recession also between 79 and 85, one of the things we learned in the financial crisis and the big rise in unemployment that led from that from 2008 onwards was a significant, substantial increase in precarious work. 0 hours contracts, temporary contracts, part-time employment, and you could add into that people going into self-employment to pull together a meagre income rather than get rich quick in any sense of the term. These kinds of employment opportunities makes it very hard to move anyone into sustainable employment because many of these types of jobs are not sustainable jobs in themselves. And there's a lot less incentive to go into those kinds of jobs as well. You're on benefits, you're not well off, not by any stretch of the imagination. You go back into, you go into a job, it's 5 or 6 weeks, 2 or 3 months, or a 0 hours contracts. It's a hell of a big risk because you come off of that job, you've got to get back into benefits and work. Universal Credit is supposed to fix all these things, of course. You go back into benefits, you have to establish your benefit status. You may have to wait again in order to before you get your first payments. So this kind of precarious labour market situation is not good. This is likely to be the case in the COVID recession. There's no good reason as to why it won't work that way this time around. We also know that as employment levels recover, employers hire from the front rather than the back of the queue. So even when the economy starts to improve, and it will improve at some point, we've got Brexit, we've got all sorts of uncertainties, but even when the economy starts to improve, it's a long time before that improvement is going to manifest itself among the ranks of the folks that are furthest back in the labour market. We also know that those that suffer most in recessions are the people that suffered most in the previous recessions, and they're sort of still stacked up there in a sense as to needing our services to help them into sustainable employment. The fundamental point is, in a significant recession like we're currently in now, those outside of the labour market suffer the most in the first instance. So that's young people coming out of school, coming out of college, coming out of university, anyone coming out of some other state, somebody who maybe been caring for a relative, trying to get back into the labour market. These are the folks that suffer the most, simply because there are insufficient numbers of vacancies. There's been a massive collapse over the last 9 months in the number of vacancies for employment that are available. And the other folk that sit at the back of the queue are those that are already at the back of the queue. So not only have we got people who have been left behind before we entered this recession, we've got additional people coming in, some of whom are going to be more attractive to employers. Certain younger people will be more attractive to employers. So that their problems worsen. So however difficult it was to implement No One Left Behind pre-COVID, it's going to be a lot more, it's going to be a lot harder from now on. Just quickly, I've identified, and this is the last slide, Alison, four challenges. And this you folks out there who are practitioners or managing practitioners or whatever, managing frontline staff, dealing with jobless people, know these things. This is about complex service delivery. A number of individuals in the Left Behind group are going to have a number of different issues. So the first complexity is for the advisor to be able to identify these expeditiously. And that's not easy. That requires building their confidence, requires a big, heavy skill set on the part of the advisor. And the second thing is having identified what we need to do in order to help this individual towards sustainable employment. There's going to be a number of services, and they've got to be sequenced properly, and they've got to be delivered at the right time when it's going to have its impact for the client. The second issue in here is the people left behind are sitting there in a sense. They're out there, there are a large number of them. We have a prevention issue that we need to deal with as well. And this is particularly relevant for young people. The issue of scarring you'll all have heard about is where we see that young people entering the labour market at a time of severe recession carry that deficit through the labour market with them in terms of the quality of employment that they're able to secure and the level of earnings they're able to secure. So we need to work really hard to avoid these scarring effects. On the other side of the age distribution, there's going to be a hell of a lot of redundancies. There already are, but there'll be a lot more. We have a system in Scotland, PACE, Promoting Action for Continuing Employment, which is a decent service, but it doesn't work brilliantly if you're 45 or over. So if you're 45 or over, you come out, you're unemployed for 6 months, you're well on the road to becoming one of the left behind. So again, we need to do a bit better at getting in there, providing a better service in a prevention context. Third thing is about employers need to step up. This applies whether it's the recession or not. I've always been a believer that public bodies and large private sector bodies can make a much bigger contribution in here in the way in which they target a significant amount of the recruitment towards people who are left behind. I've argued this strongly when I advised the Scottish Government on the disability employment gap. The employers need to step up. It's not just about preparing people, it's about preparing employers and employers being prepared to put a bigger effort into helping those that are further behind when we come out of the recession. And finally and lastly, of course, the reality is if we don't have enough jobs in, the more we help the folks that are left behind, somebody suffers. So it's displacement of one kind or another. We've got to get our finger out on the jobs front. I don't see much happening in Scotland on the jobs front. Over the last 9 months, all of my work's been focused on climate emergency, skills required for that, the employment implications of that. There's an awful simple case to be made for front-loading a lot of the work and the budget that's needed to implement that work in issues like increasing energy efficiency in homes, which is a massive task across Scotland. So we need to get the jobs going as well as the service going. Sorry I had to rush through that, but it's a start. Thank you very much, folks.
I think I'm just waiting to unmute. That's it. I'm unmuted now. Okay, thanks very much, Alan. That was a really, really good summary as ever. You know, in a relatively short time, you covered a lot of the bases that we're looking to consider today. Can I ask? I'm just going to try and see if I can see the chat box. But can I ask that people? I'm thinking about what Alan has been reflecting on. If you want to put any comments, please do so. We do have time after Alan and our next speaker to take some questions, so I'll be quite keen to do that if we can get some conversation going. But thanks very much, Alan. That was really, really helpful in giving me both setting out the context and also offering up some of the challenges that are ahead. I'd like to now introduce Joanne Farrow, who is Deputy Director for Employability of the Scottish Government. And again, delighted for you to be here today, Joanne. You've held a long and successful career in the employability field, so lots of experience to reflect on, I'm sure. But you're going to give us a government perspective now on No One Left Behind. So over to you.
Hey, thanks, Liz. I'm not sure about the long or successful, but it's certainly been a baptism of fire since I've been appointed to the role of Deputy Director since April of this year, when the previous Deputy Director moved across to focus on COVID-related activities. But I think part of the support mechanism I've had on a personal level is obviously having worked in the employability field for a number of years, and really good, strong kind of partnership relationships, and a lot of those people are on the call today. So, as you've said, thanks for the opportunity to come along and speak to you today. I'm going to provide a short overview of the No One Left Behind strategy, and probably more importantly, how we want to use this to seek to support those already disadvantaged in the labour market through the work with our partners and stakeholders. And those recent partnership discussions, I think we absolutely share an ambition to avoid the inequality gap widening as a result of the economic impacts of COVID. And a lot of what Alan's just touched upon is depressingly familiar and resonates really deeply with the conversations that we've been having. So as set out in the agenda, I'm going to provide a bit of the sort of policy framework overview, and probably Pamela and Laurel will bring this a bit more to life when we come on to their inputs, actually talking about the how the operational delivery of No One Left Behind is working in practice and actually making a difference on the ground. So, Liz, I think you touched on it yourself, but No One Left Behind was set out as the Scottish Government strategic approach back in March 2018, so best part of 3 years ago now, and outlined the next steps for employability in Scotland, and I suppose setting out the Scottish Government's ambition for a better joined up, more aligned and integrated employability service, recognising that, as Alan's pointed out, people present with many barriers and challenges, and many of the challenges that have to be tackled are not necessarily core employability support and employment support. So at that point in time, Scottish Government were looking to take forward a new approach, building on the devolution of employability support, which came from the Smith Agreement. And within that, I guess, starting to think about what's the opportunity that presents to do things a bit differently than what's gone before. So at the time, we were working to develop Fair Start Scotland, the first devolved employment support service that Scottish Government had statutory responsibility to deliver. But through the consultation process with people and organisations across Scotland that preceded the development of Fair Start Scotland, that highlighted the scope to develop services in Scotland that delivered on kind of cross-cutting policies, and really starting to think about how we join up employability support to improve the health and well-being of individuals, and thinking about links with sectors like health, housing and justice in particular. So those cross-cutting policies were articulated in 7 key policy principles, which were really set out to try and underpin the transformation of Scotland's employability services and working towards creating a more person-centred system. So starting to move away from discrete services or multiple services or programmes or pilots or initiatives, but instead thinking about a system that was more flexible and could respond to the needs of different groups of people at the time that they needed it. And I suppose provide support for as long as it was needed as well, rather than set periods of time, which is traditionally what we've seen in days gone by. So the 7 principles have been well documented, and I'm sure many people on the call will have heard of these already. But there was something about treating people with dignity and respect, fairness and equality, and really embedding an ethos of continuous improvement within what we were trying to do. There was something about a flexible and person-centred support, as I've said earlier on, and an aspiration for all age and needs-based support rather than the traditional very fixed eligibility criteria and fixed periods of time of support. There was an aspiration that the system would be straightforward for people to navigate, a no wrong door approach, as we often like to talk about it. Fourth was that support would be integrated and aligned to other services, building on the Scottish approach to service design, which was really just about putting the user at the centre of both the development and the delivery of services. The fifth was about providing pathways into sustainable and fair work, and the sixth was about making decisions driven by evidence, including the data and again the experience of users of employment support services. And lastly, support was about people supporting more people to move into the right job at the time that was right for them. So very much kind of voluntary approaches, as opposed to some of the DWP services that we've seen in Scotland previously that had an element of conditionality attached to them. So although that was all developed a couple of years ago now, I think these principles still hold good in this time and place that we now find ourselves, albeit that some of this is made more challenging by the disproportionate effect that COVID has had on different individuals or communities or local economies. So in thinking about that move from a programme to a system change, I think there was absolutely recognition that embarking on a process of what is quite significant transformational change is really challenging, especially as we weren't really setting out to rename or redesign programmes, but actually to look at change at a system level. So I think back then there was a recognition that it was really essential in taking forward that change round about these key areas, that it was important to get the 2 spheres of government who've got policy and financial responsibility in this area to come together to jointly lead the process. And when the review of employability support was published in December 2018, the Scottish and local government partnership agreement was also signed off by our Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills and Councillor Parry from COSLA, and that was really seeking to solidify a shared ambition and commitment to develop improved outcomes through a collaborative programme of reform. That joint initiative also resulted in 2 local government posts being created in the improvement service in COSLA to work at a national level to help support a joint programme of work. More broadly, the partnership agreement set out the terms of engagement, principles and governance arrangements underpinning the partnership working that we wanted to take forward. And it recognised the need for a collaborative and collective approach to put people at the centre of what we were trying to do and develop that more joined up, better aligned approach. And I think, well, I'm sure that we all recognise now that it's never more important than before in terms of responding to the impact of COVID, and that shared ambition to build back better and a commitment to place-based, inclusive, sustainable wellbeing approaches to economic recovery. So in terms of progress to date, I think Pamela will probably cover this in a little bit more detail when she talks about the delivery plan that was published last month. But I think it's fair to say that across both Scottish and local government, there's probably a sense that we are left behind and that are a little bit further behind than ideally where we would want to be. I think, like many organisations, both Scottish and local government have had to flex to meet the demands of COVID. And we've seen a lot of staff movement across Scottish Government and local government in response to that. However, we did publish a delivery plan last month, and that outlined progress in a number of key areas over the last few months. So we've embedded and adopted the Scottish approach to service design, which, as I said earlier on, that's really about ensuring that users of services are at the very heart of our approach. And in due course, it's been delayed by COVID, but in due course, partners across a range of organisations that have been supporting the development of the No One Left Behind ambition will participate in a programme to become service design champions. And I think we'll maybe hear a wee bit more about that later on. We've also implemented the first phase of activity of No One Left Behind, and that saw a change in what were activity agreements and the Scottish Employer Recruitment Incentive previously. That saw a change in how they were managed, which really enabled a kind of test of change approach, putting that money out through local government, but allowing a greater degree of flexibility on how that was utilised at a local level. Again, recognising that local demographics, local challenges would vary from area to area. I think internally within government there was a recognition that No One Left Behind and the partnership with local government was absolutely the way to go. So one of the other areas of progress that we've seen is a dedicated No One Left Behind unit within the employability division. It was something that I only managed, I think, 2 or 3 months of managing before I was temporarily promoted into this role. But the unit's gone from strength to strength, and I'm really proud of the way that they have developed their relationship with our local government colleagues and a much broader range of stakeholders, not least of all when we earlier this year established a jointly led COVID-19 operational group around about employability, really to look at and consider the disproportionate impacts on the No One Left Behind group of COVID and think about how we could come together to align our emerging responses. And that subsequently led to the development also of a senior leaders group around about employability in Scotland, really trying to embed a culture of collective leadership within the agenda. More recently, working with our local government colleagues, we've started to take forward work to strengthen local employability partnerships, and I think that's started to gather a bit of pace, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so in the new year. And again, that's very much in recognition that local partners will have a much better sense of what's needed within a local area than necessarily Scottish Government or officials sitting at a national level. And just lastly, in terms of progress, it perhaps doesn't sound like a big thing, but there was a lot of bureaucracy and administrative hoops to jump through. But Scottish Government and COSLA have worked together and agreed now how nationally available funds will be allocated across different local authority areas just based on a number of factors. So sometimes the practical things have taken quite a bit of time to work through various layers of governance. So, as I said earlier on, all of that's been delivered against a backdrop of COVID related issues and challenges, and I suppose looking forward, uncertainty around about EU exit. We've obviously seen some really rapid mitigation measures, and within that, a commitment to build back better. We've seen the job retention scheme come in. We think there's about 30% of jobs in Scotland have been supported through that. And as Alan's touched on, there's a real concern that when that ends, there'll be a sharp rise in unemployment and potentially underemployment and displacement within the labour market. So the potential for a real disproportionate impact on young people, and again, as Alan set out, who tend to suffer the scarring effects of recession, but we're also really worried about low earners, those who've got low or no skills, women within the labour market, over 50s, those with a disability, and those experiencing long-term unemployment, and probably a recognition that we might be looking at quite a new and different group of people who become long-term unemployed into next year, given that they may well have been actively seeking work for the last 12 months, but have just not been able to find anything due to the situation within the labour market. As I said before, I think within those groups that I've outlined, there's a real recognition that there will be absolutely no doubt there'll be a sectoral and geographical variation across Scotland, and that will require really flexible and adaptable responses. And that's something that I know is currently being factored into both national and local recovery plans, just thinking about how we identify those who need support and really target that support most effectively. I think there's also a kind of recognition at the moment that the approach to tackling the economic challenges needs to avoid the creation of new structures and really has to build on existing partnerships. And that's something about, that recognises the fact that we've got really strong foundations on which to build upon, but also that we need to operate at speed here. We need to move with a degree of pace and urgency. And this isn't about reinventing the wheel, it's about using what we've got and what we've worked on over the last few years to give us a springboard to provide more and better and more effective support. And within that, I think thinking about how we repurpose resources, that'll be absolutely essential as part of the response, in addition to any new resources that may come our way in terms of dealing with the forecast sharp increased demand and unemployment support. And at the moment, Scottish Government is going through its budget setting process following the Chancellor's announcement just a couple of weeks ago now. So really looking at the resource that's coming to Scotland in terms of budget and consequentials, and lots of ministerial conversations ongoing about how that resource is prioritised. So I think just to kind of finish on, the cumulative impact of COVID and leaving the EU is absolutely likely to exacerbate the challenges faced by those who are most disadvantaged in the labour market. And I think that the co-design and co-production and collaboration of employability support services will absolutely help ensure that no one is left behind. And as I said earlier on, I think Pamela and Laura are going to talk about how we actually put that into practice. So that's me in terms of the kind of policy approach to no one left behind, and a little bit of the background and what's driven that particular approach.
Okay, thank you so much, John. That was really comprehensive, actually. Detailed account of the implications and the detail of no one left behind from a government perspective and what the aspirations are. I'm looking at the chat box because we're running over. We're not running over, but we're running slightly over in terms of the timing, and I do want to try and keep us to time, but I'm just looking at the chat box to see if we've got some questions, and I'm noticing I think there is a question from Stuart Monroe, who I think is from North Ayrshire Council, and I think you did touch on this. This is probably for you, Joanne. You did touch on this, but maybe just a little bit more. He's saying, taking Alan's learning point that young people tend to be left behind in recessions, what's holding up getting the funding to the gateway organisations to implement the Kickstart initiatives? So I know you mentioned there were, obviously it's bureaucracy essentially is quite difficult to manage, but do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think firstly to point out that Kickstart's a DWP initiative, so I know that the application process has involved organisations putting themselves forward as gateway organisations to DWP, and there's been some delay, I think, in terms of processing those applications. I'm sure you can imagine the volume of stuff that DWP are trying to deal with at a national level. But also we've had, particularly in Scotland, a couple of local authorities whose application has been unsuccessful. So both from a Scottish Government and a local government perspective, we've been really pushing DWP for feedback and support to work on those applications just to get them over the line. And I think just to kind of reassure people on the call, we have, I think particularly through the development of Fair Start Scotland, we've had to develop a really close working relationship with both DWP at a UK level and Job Centre Plus at a Scottish level. So there's an absolute commitment from our DWP partners to work with us on Kickstart in Scotland. And then the additional funding that Scottish ministers announced back in the summer that would support young people, that was always intended to wrap around that core DWP offer. And again, there's been lots of work going on at a kind of national and a local level to consider how we best add value to the core funding that's coming from UK government. So hopefully that helps. But if there's any specifics, then obviously happy to take them offline and pick up any questions.
Okay, thanks, John. I think picking up on that, we've also got a question from Pegs Bailey, who is, I won't go through it's quite a lengthy detailed, I don't know if you'll have a chance to look at this in the chat box, but it's essentially saying that No One Left Behind funding comes in multiple different parcels and has been released at different timeframes. And, that's obviously making it tricky in terms of presumably planning and implementation. So going forward, it would be helpful to have the allocations announced earlier in the year to allow open commissioning and to the commitment to one pot kept central to the approach. Is that something you can commit to, you can comment on here today?
So it wouldn't be for me to commit, unfortunately. If it was within my gift to do so, then I would. So I think when the Chancellor set out his spending review statement a couple of weeks ago, there was a real hope that it would be a 3-year spending review period, but probably a recognition in advance of it. That might be unlikely given the current economic climate. So unfortunately, when the statement was made, it's a 1-year spending review period, which means that Scottish Government will get their 1-year budget allocation from UK Government as a result of that. So there's something about working through that process over the next year and working with our Treasury colleagues in order to look at longer term spending review periods that give a bit of certainty of approach. The difficulty when we are operating within an annualised budget is doing something different at a local level and given that longer term commitment. But it was absolutely an aspiration of No One Left Behind and one that still stands good. And I think, again, a real recognition that particularly for our third sector colleagues, the certainty that multi-year funding would bring would really add value to the landscape. So it's not an aspiration that's lost. I think it's the place and time that we're in at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think there's an additional comment that's come in saying, obviously appreciating that, it is a really difficult time for everybody, not least of all with everybody working from home and remotely, etc. We have, I think, I was going to say, if people can't access the chat box, they can actually put their hand up. And I think we might have a raised hand from Taylor Stewart. Would that be right? I'm going to need some technical help here if we're going to fit this one in.
Apologies, Liz. No, I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Oh, hi, Taylor.
It was just a wave.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Well, we'll wave back to you then. We'll move on now. Can I encourage everyone, though? We do have, I think, over 80 people in the room. So as such as it is. But if you're able to, think of some questions or comments, please do add them to the box as we're going along. I have to say, I much prefer chairing events when we're in a single room. It's quite challenging reading boxes, looking at your phone and whatever. But hopefully we'll be able to keep on track reasonably well. So thanks very much, Joanne. I'd like to move now on to Pamela Smith, who is, of course, manager with employment and training at Falkirk Council. But of course, I think many people will know Pamela as previous chair of Slade. And she's going to give us a presentation on really a kind of local government perspective on the delivery of No One Left Behind. So over to you, Pamela. And again, I'm not sure if we need to get some slides organised here potentially.
Yep, thanks.
Are you there, Pam? I couldn't see you
Yes,
there. I'll just share your slides just now. Super, sorry about that.
Thank you. So I'm just going to pick up where Joanne's left off, and I'll leave my colleague Laura to do the kind of boots on the ground example. So I'm going to talk a bit about the delivery plan and taking the strategic commitment into some discrete planned actions, particularly over the next 12 months. So as Joanne said, the delivery plan was published on the 24th of November, and again reinforcing the joint political commitment. The foreword was prepared by the Minister for Fair Work, Business and Skills and the COSLA spokesperson for Community and Wellbeing, again cementing the shared ambition that we signed up to in December 2018. Alison, if you can just move on the next slide. I'm going to talk to is really around the delivery plan and the 6 themes that it's set against. And both Alan and Joanne have spoke about the scale of the challenge. So the delivery plan was quickly reorientated to look at the potential impact of COVID-19 and the emerging scale of the challenge. Of course, we don't know when it's going to stop and what it's going to look like when it eventually settles, particularly given the discussions on leaving the EU as well. So the plan initially looks at the labour market as it is at the minute, and looks at the emerging disproportionate impacts on individuals, communities and sectors. And again, it is in the areas that we would expect that have suffered most in the national and local lockdowns, a lot of the hospitality, retail and some other construction related sectors. And again, Skills Development Scotland have been producing regular labour market bulletins, so you can keep on top of some of the skills and economic aspects there. But there is also a whole range of unknowns, and as both Alan and Joanne said, we are finding there may well be a different group of individuals who may be at risk of being left behind on top of the young people and those who were already unemployed and disadvantaged. The delivery plan highlights some of the progress today, and Joanne touched on some of that, so I'm just really going to touch on some of the points in addition. So as well as having a new governance structure created that includes a wide range of stakeholders, we've also developed a number of work streams, and all of these work streams have action plans with some key deliverables. Last year, we also incorporated, as Peg's highlighted, a new funding stream, the Parental Employment Support Fund. And then more recently, we had a boost to that fund to help support young parents, disabled parents, and to try and align more effectively with the early learning and childcare guarantee. We've also been looking at aligning better with the Disability Employment Action Plan, and the progress report was presented last year, and we're about to see a further progress update in February, and hopefully the results of the review undertaken on the individual placement service. Both of these will be critical as we see the disability employment gap starting to grow again, and we know that a number of individuals are experiencing mental health issues, and again they will need more in-work support. So both of those aspects are well underway in terms of this year and looking at action planning as we go forward. I think, as Joanne said, we have adopted the Scottish approach to service design, and this is to move away from the programmes, the whole plethora of different programmes, different eligibilities, to make sure that we respond to what people need at the time they need it and in the way that they need the service delivered, and so that we solve what they see as their problems, not what we see as their problems and issues. We've also recently published an agreed framework for strengthening local partnerships, and we've appended to that how local government are delivering their commitment to the Young Persons Guarantee. Those frameworks have been shared with partners at national level and a local level, and we're commencing some discussions on how we become more effective at collaborating and co-producing local delivery plans. The delivery plan also confirmed that the Employability Fund and Community Jobs Scotland have been extended up to March 2022, and they will feature in the next phase of No One Left Behind's transformation, and also Fair Start Scotland was extended up to March 2023. As Joanne said, we also agreed on allocations methodology for the distribution of national funding across the 32 local authority areas, and that will serve as well as we move towards more local governance arrangements. But unfortunately, it is only annual allocations at the minute, as was said, but we now have a framework for that distribution. Working Together for Scotland, we have started more with the spheres of government, lining up our various policies and approaches, and we have increasingly got more stakeholder engagement, and we're about to circulate the communication and stakeholder engagement plan, which a number of partners have been involved in. We've also been looking at more collective leadership at the centre, and the senior leaders group will help to shape that. And as part of the service design, we've also created lived experience panels so that the user's voice is a lot louder than it has been before. And I think, as Alan had highlighted, the public sector and other large employers need to positively target those who need help most. And again, that's about a shift away from some universal eligibility to more targeted support, because in an opportunities for all, it usually means more opportunities for some. And again, the gap normally widens and inequalities normally widen. In terms of support and economic recovery, we have been responding to the advisory group and the Enterprise and Scale Strategic Board, and some of the training providers were given additional flexibilities and additional support to third sector, and there was a range of business support to help maintain the infrastructure. But we also have to look at how we link better the opportunities in need. And again, Alan gave an example around housing installation, other investment programs, and we are through community wealth building and looking at our procurement powers, seeing how we can capitalise on that for those who need jobs created for them, as we're going to move into a period of jobs deficit. And again, we need to try and level up for those who find themselves excluded. Ensuring no one left behind, we are adopting an inclusion and equalities first approach. And again, we have to equalities proof all of our actions and all of our decisions. And the plan outlines for the next year some key milestones, and I'll touch on them shortly. But it reinforces our joint commitment and it confirms some status quo of existing programmes, given the uncertainty within the current labour market. If we move on, Alison. So in terms of the No One Left Behind, as Joanne said, it is more than money, and it's more than about the money. It's about a transformation, and it's about us as partners collectively trying to sustain the shift towards more user engagement, better collaborative service design, more effective and enhanced partnership working, and agreeing shared measures and common approaches to inclusive communications and inclusive ways of working. So whilst the money is important, we don't want to get fixated only on the money, because it's about transforming how we work to improve the outcomes for those who are most disadvantaged. So we are looking at collaboration, co-production, co-commissioning, and we've already started some of that process, albeit the Young Persons Guarantee money came pretty quickly to local government, again through an agreed allocations methodology, but we are looking at developing with our partners at local level delivery plans and involving much more user engagement at local level as well. So whatever our aspirations are nationally, through the strengthening local partnerships, we are trying to enhance that at local level. And Laura will give you a flavour of one particular approach in Renfrewshire shortly. We've also extended an invitation to our partners to get more involved at a national and local level, and we are undertaking a review of all of the work streams to ensure that we have appropriate participation and involvement from all who have an interest within it. Moving on, Alison, and I'll just quickly touch on the next, I think that's gone back a slide, Alison. Yep, thank you. I'll just touch slightly on the work streams given the shortness of time, and you'll be able to look in more detail at all of the different deliverables. But there are 6 work streams. So service design we've touched on, and to help us deal with the complex issues that were mentioned by Alan, we are looking at more lived experience panels. We're looking at establishing the National Design Group and, as Joanne said, having the service design champions. We are hoping in the next year to publish the first iteration of the customer charter and also to publish the first iteration of employability national standards framework, again, all contributed to by partners. Within the governance and risk, we are looking at more evidence-based local partnership delivery plans to help inform that local commission strategy. And we also have to agree a model of external scrutiny and agree an assessment of readiness framework so that we can move to a much more local governance arrangement across the 32 local authority areas. On the shared measurement framework, we have already agreed, and the Minister has agreed to publish No One Left Behind phase 1 statistics in February of next year, and then from May to publish them quarterly. During the course of the year, we'll agree an evaluation framework and a continuous improvement strategy, and we are working with SDS and SCVO to agree appropriate exit strategies for Employability Fund and Community Jobs Scotland. In terms of the policy and finance, we will be confirming budgets hopefully after the annual spending review, and again within the local partnerships, ensure that we are aligning the resources with the needs and that we can start to improve outcomes for the target group that we're all interested in supporting. Alignment and integration, and Laura will give you a flavour of this, but we are keen to make sure that we effectively align with the Young Persons Guarantee, with other services that are of benefit to the individuals we're supporting, with the city deals and growth deals, ensuring that any investment is delivering outcomes where we want them, and also to ensure that we can effectively align with tackling child poverty and in work poverty. And finally, the communications. We were hoping to launch the refreshed Employability in Scotland website, and that will now be in the new year, probably April, so that we can effectively work and share resources online. And the next slide is the final one, Alison. Again, just as Pegs was saying, there is still a jigsaw of programmes out there, and there is a wider context in which we're delivering No One Left Behind. But hopefully we can start with the policy framework and delivery programme to pull all of these into the one pot and have a truly person-centred all age needs-based service and close the inequality gap and ensure no one is left behind. And Laura's going to talk a wee bit about No One Left Behind in action. So thanks for listening, and hopefully I've not over my time. And Laura's going to do a local case study.
Okay, just trying to. Okay, thank you very much, Pamela. That was again very comprehensive, especially given the challenges of the time that you had there. But again, very clear, I think, for all of the participants. I am conscious of time, we're slightly over, so I just want to move straight on now. It does link to what you were saying anyway, as you say, because we're now about to look at a case study from Renfrewshire Council, and Laura Neal is going to share that with us. Laura has worked in economic development since 1992, delivering and managing programmes and initiatives offering opportunities for unemployed people to secure sustained employment. So she's going to share some of that experience with us this afternoon. So over to you, Laura, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can actually see my screen. So I'm Laura Neal. I'm the Assistant Economic Development Manager with Invest in Renfrewshire. So Invest in Renfrewshire is Renfrewshire Council's employability service. We sit within economic development. That has been a structure that's been embedded over the last decade. And we have services around employability, business and communities. So that enables us to actually deliver an economic development service. We have a local employability partnership, which includes the key stakeholders. It's chaired by Economic Development, and we have Skills Development Scotland, West College Scotland, DWP, Engage, which is their third sector interface, Renfrewshire Chamber of Commerce, DYW, Education, Housing, Criminal Justice and Community Justice. And our key policy driver is No One Left Behind. And we have identified a range of key target groups from No One Left Behind, and we have a range of subgroups from our LEP. So as you can probably see from that, there's lots of activity going on. And in addition to that, we have a practitioner forum, which supports networking and referrals. So just looking at No One Left Behind, our key target groups are young people. We have seen since March the claimants for young people doubling in Renfrewshire, so they are one of our key target groups. The age range that we support is 16 to 24. We also prioritise people who live in our 0 to 5% SIMD areas. We previously had the highest level of deprivation in Scotland, and we targeted our resources specifically within the highest area of deprivation, and that has now changed, and Renfrewshire no longer has the highest level of deprivation. So I think targeting our resources is really important. We also prioritise people with convictions, people with disabilities and people with health and mental health issues. So the case study I'm going to share is around our Just Learning Skills for Employment programme. It was developed in 2018. It was an Employability, Innovation and Integration Fund pilot programme funded by the Scottish Government. There was 13 projects funded across Scotland. It was a very successful programme, and in 2019 it became a No One Left Behind service. So we looked to improve employment outcomes for people with convictions. We looked at how we could actually integrate service delivery across employability, housing and criminal justice so that we could provide a holistic solution to supporting people into employment. We also wanted to deliver community justice outcomes, and we wanted to reduce reoffending in Renfrewshire and also reduce inequalities. So I'd like to just introduce you to Stephen, and I've had consent from Stephen to actually share his story. So Stephen had a conviction. Stephen stole his parents' car. He was involved in a high-speed police chase, which resulted in him crashing his parents' car. So Stephen actually had a custodial sentence. He became unemployed. he was homeless, he had no family network. Earlier, Alan spoke about having multiple barriers and how that actually makes your chances of moving into employment significantly less. So for Stephen, that was exactly what was going to happen for him. We delivered an outreach programme within Lomos Prison. That was part of the Employability Innovation Integration Fund. So we were based in Lomos Prison for 1 day a week. So we met Stephen while he was in prison. He then registered with Invest in Renfrewshire when he left prison. We worked in partnership with West College Scotland, and we had a YES programme, which is Your Essential Skills. So Stephen attended the YES programme. He then moved on to an employability fund placement placed within Renfrewshire Council. He completed his Streetworks qualification, and he then secured a paid traineeship within Renfrewshire Council, and he was employed within the Roads Department. He then completed the traineeship, and he was successful in securing a modern apprenticeship. So Stephen is not left behind, and he's still receiving support. Alan also spoke earlier about how public sector employers have to step up. And I hope from this example that you can see Renfrewshire Council, as one of the largest employers in the area, has really stepped up and provided lots of opportunities for individuals. And this has made such a big difference for Stephen as well. I think the key success factors in Stephen were about engagement. It's important to actually establish really strong engagement through regular contact. And this was successful from Lomos Prison initially, and then that relationship then continued once Stephen was actually out of prison, which is really, really important. Stephen also gained a number of qualifications. We have an online platform, so Stephen was able to access some of the online qualifications that we can offer. And again, I think just actually achieving something really developed Stephen's confidence. And then obviously moving on to the West College Scotland programme, Your Essential Skills was absolutely transformational. Stephen was so proud to be at college. He was proud to be a student. We've had other people with convictions attending that programme who have been on community payback orders. And again, they have attended really well, and they've actually exceeded the number of hours that they are required to do in terms of a community payback, which is a massive challenge. So I think just looking at COVID-19, because obviously that does give us all significant challenges, and I think it is a significant challenge, but I think it's a challenge for us all. And I think, what does the future hold? It holds what all stakeholders and services choose to offer. We all have some influence over what we can offer and how we can actually widen inequalities. And this is what we're offering within Renfrewshire Council. Our outreach was really important within our SIMD communities and also within the prison. So we have continued to maintain those partnerships and those relationships and those referral pathways. And I think that's really important, and it's probably taken a lot of additional effort because we are not able to do that face-to-face. So we've had to put in different measures to enable us to maintain those partnerships. We've continued to work with colleagues delivering community payback orders. That service at present isn't operating on a face-to-face basis. So we have been able to offer employability opportunities and interventions, which then enable individuals to reduce the number of community payback hours that they have to do, as well as actually gaining and working towards their employment. We are currently delivering cohort 3 with the Your Essential Skills programme with the college. This is our face-to-face delivery. This is the only kind of face-to-face group delivery that we have. The college is large enough to enable that to be done safely. And with this particular cohort, we were really struggling to maintain engagement. So this face-to-face delivery has actually really helped that and strengthened the journey in terms of that sustainable journey towards employment. Renfrewshire Council as an employer has stepped up and provided a range of opportunities And that has been really important in terms of actually giving people something beneficial to do, to build up that structure and routine and a bit of continuity during these challenging times. We have a range of community benefit contractors, and we have ensured that those community benefit contractors are actually providing advantage for those who are disadvantaged, and we're not displacing those community benefit pledges, and we're making the most of them to ensure no one is left behind. And that's enabling us to actually deliver employability, but ensuring that we're actually delivering inclusive growth across Renfrewshire. In terms of the service design, we have included no one left behind groups within our service design. We have asked those individuals what is required, and all of our services have been designed targeting those specific groups. We have a range of resources, so we have funding through No One Left Behind. We have also been approved as a Kickstart Gateway provider. That was approved last week. So we are just about to implement 300 Kickstart job opportunities in Renfrewshire, and we will ensure that we support the key target groups around No One Left Behind to make sure that we can actually prepare them to compete effectively for those Kickstart opportunities. We will also utilise the Young Person's Guarantee to make sure that no one is left behind, and we can provide opportunities as required. And we continue to have our ESF grant, which supports people with multiple barriers. And again, our No One Left Behind individuals meet that criteria. So I think the really important thing is about taking all these resources and maximising opportunities, making sure that we don't duplicate, but we actually maximise every single piece of investment that we have in the area to make sure that we can make the future better and we can avoid widening inequalities. So we want to ensure no one is left behind. We want to actually make sure that we can pull down those branches so that those who could not reach now can reach. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, Lola. That was great, and I think just brought to life what this programme is all about, really. And I think I really like the way that you made a point of saying, you know, that the engagement takes time, and you know, yeah, it takes time, it takes effort, you know, in order to get those partnerships working. I think they would always take time, regardless. But in actual fact, sorry, I've just lost my screen. Am I still here? Just check. There you go. So something came up on my screen there. Yeah. So that in actual fact, you know, that it was challenging before, but it's even more challenging now, given that people are working remotely. So the effort does need to really go in. There's been some interesting chat. I don't know if people have been following this on the chat box during the presentations. Not too many questions, but there's just one that is kind of informing some of the conversation here that I just want to pick up on. And it's possibly for Joanne, I think, to answer, or possibly Pamela. And it's really about how do organisations that aren't part of the kind of mainstream employability landscape, if you like. So lots of organisations out there, lots of third sector organisations out there delivering employability on the ground in local communities, doing really fantastic work, but aren't necessarily connecting in with this agenda. And so there's a kind of question throughout the thread about how do they do that? And some people have been coming up with solutions. I'm glad to see, you know, third sector interfaces being mentioned as one potential route. I think, Pamela, you mentioned something about SCVO as well being involved. So I don't know, do you want to just comment on the best way to get the most from people's contributions? Because clearly the position that we're in now, going forward, we're going to need all sectors, all resources, all thinking, to be brought to bear to make this agenda work. So I don't know who wants to maybe answer first. I'm conscious you're both on mute as well if you do respond.
John, will I maybe kick it off, and then you could come in through No One Left Behind and through delivering the Young Person's Guarantee. Obviously, third sector, national and local have an interest. And through strengthening local partnerships, we're hoping to do most of the collaboration and co-production at local authority levels. Through the community planning partnership structure, and the TSIs, of course, have a seat at the table there. However, like a lot of things when you go across the 32 local authority areas, they're quite variable in terms of their capacity, their knowledge, their skills. There is also a lot of national third sector organisations who are delivering either directly or on the fringes, and sometimes they have boots on the ground, but they don't have maybe the local accountability in terms of the management, commissioning, etc. So we agreed with SCVO we'd kick some of this off by having a webinar in early new year, and that was to look at the best practice within local employability partnerships between local government and third sector. And I think Renfrewshire, Fife and Dundee are the three areas that we're going to focus on firstly. And then we were talking with colleagues in the Third Sector Employability Forum, SCVO, Project Scotland, etc., about having a kind of workshop where we had geographic clusters so that we could involve third sector involved within that cluster with the local authority leads to discuss how they do and they don't connect and the best way of rewiring that infrastructure kind of moving forward. So that's where we're at and trying to reach out and trying to set up forums and then to set up more formally the co-commissioning, which will be different from a kind of delivery forum as well. So I don't know, Joanne, if you have anything to add to that.
I don't think so, Pamela. I think that was really comprehensive. I think for me, and you've touched on this, it's the importance of being able to join up at a kind of national and a local level in terms of this agenda. And I think, you know, the work that you've outlined in terms of that kind of local agenda will really help to progress those local links and those local relationships. And I saw a bit of chat about the third sector interfaces, and again, really keen to link in with the third sector interfaces and make sure that the connection's there at a local level. But if anybody's got any additional ideas, then I'm sure Pamela and I are really happy to hear them.
So one thing I would add to that then, because I'm conscious that community controlled housing associations, for example, in their regeneration work, do an awful lot of work around employability, and quite often they're over to the side. And kind of exist in their own sort of silos. They do fantastic work, but they don't necessarily connect with this mainstream agenda. So again, if there's a way to perhaps have conversations with SFHA or with the Glasgow West Scotland Housing Association Forum, for example, I think that would be a good route in, again, for joining up that part of the agenda. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional, it's been good chat on the chat box, but it has been conversational as opposed to more questions, and I'm mindful of time. So could I move to just have some closing remarks and closing comments from the contributors today, because we're giving you the opportunity, having listened to everybody and considered some of the conversation that's been going on, just to have some final words on what you think the future holds. And again, if we can do it in order of those who spoke. So if I can go to you, Alan, first, if you wouldn't mind coming in.
Yeah, I've got two things to say, really. One is it's awful complicated out there. I mean, the economy is in a very complex position, all sorts of things happening. We have no control over these things. And the danger is that you begin to mirror the complexity of the economy with the complexity of what we do. So at all times, you've got to keep this. The older I get, the more I think do a few things really, really well would be my motto. And so as long as, and I can see attempts in here to bring things together to enable that to happen, single pots of money, all that sort of stuff, which I like. Yes, that's the right road to go down. And the second thing, right at the other end of the spectrum, Laura's presentation was really, really excellent. And one of the things at the heart of it, which I always like, is I like a good case study, because that is the way in which you can see how it all comes together for the client. You can see the different elements in there that's going to work for that young guy and how it's going to move him on. And as Laura indicated, build his confidence. I always feel that we don't make enough of these case studies. We don't have the folk that have gone through our processes. We don't have enough of them on the stage, in a sense, talking to us. They've been great. And that's not a criticism, Laura. It'd be great if that young guy had come and spoken to everybody that was here so they could hear it firsthand. I mean, Laura captured it all. But I'm a great believer in the value of, I've always believed in engaging folks that the services are intended for in the design of the services. And I mean that. I mean, I've done a lot of studies over the years using that process. So I thought it was really good. I've been slightly adrift of the employability agenda for the last 12 months or so. I particularly got a lot of value for it, and the presentations were all superb, I thought.
Okay, Joanne, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Liz. So probably more of the same. I think the thing that makes me a bit anxious is just the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. And we've talked a lot about the potential for the groups that we've traditionally tried to support through the work of the Employability Division in Scottish Government in conjunction with our partners and stakeholders. The fear is that they become further behind in terms of recession. And, you know, Alan really articulated the nature of the problem. You know, basically people are competing with groups of individuals who are much more newly unemployed and have much more recent workplace skills, and it's just how we balance that, you know, again at a national and a local level, to make sure that we're providing as much support as we can to everybody. I think that the Scottish approach to service design, I've popped the link into the chat bar, but I think that offers an opportunity to think about things in a different perspective and really build in the voice of the user. So it's picking up on Alan's point really about, you know, case studies really bring this to life, but actually can they go one step further and get people who have been either involved in accessing support or know people that have had to access support, can we start to engage them in our conversation rather than the you know, with the best will in the world, the same old faces around the table, talking about the same stuff that we've been talking about for many years. I think there's a real opportunity to do things in a different way. There's a, you know, there's a political buy-in to that. There's buy-in at kind of Scottish Government official level, at a senior level within government. And I think the partnership working agreement with local government offers a real opportunity as well. And I think, you know, just to finish, you know, Pamela set out in her presentation the fact that although Scottish and local government have come together to develop a partnership working agreement round about this, that's not exclusive. This really needs the skills and expertise of everybody across government. I've been working in the employability world for a long time, and I would be lying if you think that I'm sitting here with all the answers to this. I mean, it really needs, we need to harness the collective leadership and the collective expertise of people working in this sector across Scotland. So I think there's a bit of a kind of call to action in terms of what more we can do to support people, both in terms of the supply side of employability, but as Alan mentioned in his presentation, the demand side as well. How do we create opportunities? And we probably need a separate session on that.
Thanks very much, John. Okay, so some clear messages here. Keep things simple, keep things straightforward, and involve the people who are experiencing this at the sharp end. It's funny, I just very quickly reflect, I was involved in a big initiative a number of years ago called Reshaping Care for Older People, and parts of that programme did just that. They got older people involved in redesigning the services that they were experiencing, and it was those activities and those projects that made the most difference. There's a lot of evidence for that, you know, involvement of people who are experiencing services, and it really should be at the heart of everything that we do, I think, in terms of planning and delivery. Okay, over to you, Pamela, just to give you the opportunity now.
Thank you, Liz. I mean, probably just a few statements. I would say we have to be bold and we have to be less risk averse. We have to look at the value and get less hung up in the cost, because if we're going to positively target those who need it most, it will take a lot of time. We will have to be bold and we will have to positively target. And these are a lot of things that people shy away from, to keep everybody happy and give everybody a wee bit. And I think, as Alan says, so maybe we just have to do a few things well, but be bold and steadfast sticking to it, because we end up on one path and then before you know it, we're branched off in another 5. And I suppose that's down to us having some strong collective leadership, but having a lot of good advocates. You know, like Alan says, around the Disability Employment Action Plan, you know, there should be targets. We should be aiming to call the public sector and big employers to account, because I don't know what Disability Confident actually delivers in terms of tangible outcomes. You know, just giving people badges to put on their letterhead and all that. We want to actually see those case studies. So I suppose we have to be bold and more challenging, and that's what I would be keen to see as we move forward.
Thanks, Pamela. Yeah, couldn't agree with those points more. Thank you. Well said. Laura, do you want to come in finally?
Yeah, I think, you know, we do have a huge challenge. I don't think anybody is underestimating the challenge that we face, but I think, you know, there are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of resources available. Kickstart is a really good starting point. And if we can get as many Kickstart opportunities as possible for our young people that can move into them, and then use the rest of our resources to support others who won't be eligible for that programme. I think it's just about pulling as much resource in as possible and making sure that it is targeted where it's actually going to make a difference, and we don't duplicate any of our funding or any of our efforts, but they all kind of make a big difference, because that's what we need to do.
Okay. Thanks, Laura. I suppose another thing that has been occurring to me as we've been having this session, excuse me, and also previously, is just, do we need to rethink the way that work is actually organised? You know, we're hearing conversations now about, well, clearly there's been people who have been work rich versus work poor over many years, but do we need to start looking at things like 4-day weeks, about, you know, those who've got too much work actually sharing some of that out so that there's more to go around going forward? I don't know, there's a lot to debate here, clearly in the months and years ahead, as we see the impact of what COVID has left us with, and also clearly Brexit that is now fast approaching. Okay, that is all for today, everybody. I just want to round things up by giving thanks to Alan, Joanne, Pamela and Laura for their excellent contributions, and also for taking time out, because I know how busy everybody is in the working day. Thanks also to excuse me, Elaine and Alison, who've been doing all the technical support throughout and making sure that we see the slides and organising the event and everybody's here on time, etc. And thanks also to you, everybody, for tuning in this afternoon, when again, I think you're probably all taking time out of your working day to do so. We will share a report that incorporates all of the slides and a recording as well of today's event, and also kind of some of the key links and the points in the chat box, so you will get all of that. And also we'll keep you posted about the next 2 sessions that are going to be running in the new year. We're still looking, I think, to finalise some dates for those, but as I say, there's one on communities and one on business in the context of No One Left Behind, so details of that will be coming shortly. So thanks again. Please do join us for those in the future, and in the meantime, can I wish everybody a safe and enjoyable Christmas when it comes, which is obviously very soon. So thank you, everybody, and good evening.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.